Okay, we're already a couple minutes late, so let's get started. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Alexander Rao. I'm a senior manager with Mandiant, and Mandiant is the #1 incident response company in the world. Have you read anything about any incidents in the last couple of months? What company did you read?
Like Intel, this factor and
That wasn't really a breach. That's a vulnerability in what they produce. That was the big one last year. So I will not be able to comment or say what sort of customers we worked on, but it's very likely that if you read it in the news, that Mandiant worked on it. So Mandiant was founded 14 years ago by Kevin Mandia, and a couple years ago bought by FireEye. So our mother company is called FireEye, but Mandiant still exists as a brand from a incident response and other strategic consulting services perspective. Has anyone worked with Mandiant before or used Mandiant before? What did you guys do with us? If it was an incident response, you might not want to talk about it.
No, it wasn't related to a specific incident, but it was helping with incident response preparedness.
Right, that's another big piece what we do, right? Because we see firsthand how attackers circumvent all of the tools and techniques that we're putting in place, and from what we learn, we're helping our other customers to learn from that and prevent future breaches. So this is rough the agenda, what I want to go through. I want to keep this interactive. If I don't go through it, I'm very happy. That means that you guys are asking me lots of questions. So from a FireEye Mandiant perspective, what we believe in is, and who has heard of FireEye before? What comes to mind when you guys think FireEye?
VM sandboxes.
That's right. Everybody thinks that FireEye is a sandboxing company, but we're so much more, right? We have a lot of hands-on experience, what I just talked about from an incident response perspective. I think in 2016, we spent over 200,000 hours on incident response breaches, breach investigations that we looked at. And I think last year will be even more. So we have experts, as I said, who see firsthand what does and what does not work. Then the other thing is our intelligence. Has anyone heard of a company called iSight? iSight Partners? We bought a company called iSight Partners. We have 300 analysts that are embedded in the dark web of the internet, and who are sort of sleuthing around and listening to what's going on, who will be the next target, or what sort of information is being advertised for sale by the bad guys of companies who have already been breached. So this intelligence piece is very important to us. And also innovative technology, like we talked about sandboxing, but everybody has cloned and owned the technology from us, like Cisco has a couple of products that start with Fire, Palo Alto has all of that. So we need to come up with new technologies to put this hands-on experience, intelligence in, so our customers can benefit from it. So why do we differ from other organizations? And I promise after this the sales pitch is done. But it really paints a picture, right, from not only from an incident response perspective, but from an overall cybersecurity perspective. So with over 10 plus years experience, we have a very, very large repository of information that's only available to us and to our clients should they decide to work with us. I already mentioned incident response, right? We have over 300 incident responders worldwide. It's just the largest incident responder bench that any company has out there. And we spread them around 26 companies, and we do business really globally. With not only in the US, where we heard Equifax already, but we deal with organizations that are breached worldwide. We have the adversarial intelligence, what I just mentioned, the iSight Partners acquisition. So we see sort of if there's new malware that's being advertised on the dark web, if there's credit cards or credit card records or health records that are being advertised, and we can then sort of do breach notification to our clients. We have campaign intelligence, like the attribution. Like for every organization that's being breached, how many breaches do they see? 1. But we see so many more, and if we can attribute all that knowledge together from an attacker, and I'll talk about Finton. Has anybody heard about the Finton threat actor? we'll talk about that in a bit. It's a threat actor that we have identified only being active in Canada, right? And if we have this intelligence and we know that a victim is being attacked by this sort of threat actor, it's much faster for us to scope an incident with the customer and help them to remediate and get the bad guys out. And then we have the machine intelligence from all of the FireEye hardware that's out there, so we see real time how some of these attacks are going on a global basis. Does anyone have any FireEye appliances currently at their work? So if you take anything away from this presentation, go to our FireEye booth and get a fidget spinner. If you have kids, you know what fidget spinner are, at least it says FireEye on it. No, I'm joking, but yeah, so there's a lot there. There's also more information about FireEye and so on. Any questions at this point? Has anyone dealt with an incident, like that they can confidentially talk about?
Sure.
Lance?
No, the largest incident before Yahoo ever happened as far as customer data being lost.
And what sort of lessons did you learn that you didn't know before, which is pretty much key in incident response?
I think a lot of trends that people are seeing that the attackers who are in our network are able to exfiltrate all the data long before we detected them. The extent of which the breach actually occurred, even after we knew we were breached, took years to figure out in detail. And like some of the facts are still not completely clear. Like
Right, they're still investigating.
Yeah, exactly. You'll never find out all the answers.
Right. Right, so thanks for that. And we all always seem to be talking about breaches when it is an attacker from the outside. But there's also breaches that happen from the inside too, right? Employees losing USB keys, employees leaking information. We get called in for that sort of investigation as well. How does that happen? How was the employee able to get this data out even though there was, for example, DLP involved? We all know that we can take pictures of our phone from a TV, our monitors, right? How do you prevent somebody from doing that, for example? The cyber threat landscape. I'm probably not telling you anything new that you haven't heard. But what I will, and Lance, you talked about the attackers were in your environment before you even knew it. I talked to somebody, and this morning there was a number being thrown around 200 days. Did you guys hear that? I will give out a fidget spinner to who guesses the number from the Mandiant Report. Does anyone know what Mandiant came up with last year with the number?
Number what, sir?
Of days before a company knows that they have been attacked.
233.
That was the year before. Okay, I'll leave you to ponder. No Googling allowed. So we all know what the threat actors are, right? But what has Mandiant seen last year that is changing? What do we have to sort of pay attention to? If you work in an organization and you have to protect your crown jewels, what's the biggest obstacle that you have in an organization doing your daily work? There's at least three things that come to my mind. Money, you don't have enough money, right? You will never be given enough money to protect what you have. Then number two, resources. You will never be given enough resources to protect what you have. And then time, right? So all of these things are limited for you, and you have to do the best job to protect the organization. Who does not have these one of these three constraints? I want to work for you if you have them. But what we're noticing here, especially on this side of the table, is that these two, the organized crime and the state sponsors, are starting to pool their resources together. So what does that mean? You have a pool of unlimited resources, time, money, and people, attacking organizations that are constrained in those three areas. So what does that mean? If they want to achieve a goal, they will achieve it. Given enough time, money, and resources, they will attack and they will get into an organization. So, and we all know that for a long time in the cybersecurity industry, we said we will not get hacked, right? We have the firewalls, everything is up and we're up to date. That's what Equifax thought. But then it happens, right? So we have to come up with a different way of how we address these attacks and these breaches. So we have to also focus on breach response and what do we do after the breach. And I'll talk about that towards the end if we ever get there. Has anyone dealt, other than Lance, with organized crime or state-sponsored activity in their environment that they know of? Do you know who attacked you?
I used to work for a telco, so
Okay. Yeah, the telcos actually, there was something in the news last week, right? I'm not giving a name, but they were breached. So yeah, telco is a big target. So and here's just some things, and I think you guys will be making these slides, BC Aware will make these slides available for you. So if you want to use something like that to talk to your management, to give you more time, money, or resources to help you in fighting this, here are some good reasons why they should do that, right? It will always be a losing game, but that's not how we can package it. We can't just get up and walk away from our jobs. We still have to do something to protect our organization. So here are just a quick summary of what the motivators are trying to target. What sort of industries do we have here? Do we have mining here today? Anyone from mining? Telco? Finance, banking? What other industries? Throw a couple of things out. What do you have here? Government? Do you think the Canadian government is a target? Yeah, it is. We have something that they take, right? So oftentimes we don't even know why we get attacked, for example, from a Chinese threat actor. They don't do it for the purpose of stealing records to sell it. They do it for the intelligence to see if they maybe can copy an industry or build an industry in China with the knowledge that they can gain from industries here in the West. And by here in the West, I mean like Canada, Europe, US, that they could attack. Even emails, right, could be interesting to somebody where we think. So you really need to know in your organization what the crown jewels are that you want to protect. It goes down to basic cybersecurity principles. Do a risk assessment, know what your crown jewels are, and build your program around that. Right? Sometimes that's not that easy because what you think your crown jewels are, the attacker might think they might be able to want to get different information from your organization other than your crown jewels, right? So we really have to make sure that we protect the organization in a way that if we get attacked, we can properly respond to the attack. Finton. We released a report. Here's the link. If you can't find it, email me. I can send you the PDF. Is a threat actor that was attributed by Mandiant to a Canada-only active threat actor. The industries that we have seen Finton attacking is mining and the gaming industry. And what they did is they went into the organizations through phishing. For example, in the gaming industry where there's also a lot of restaurants and there's a lot of sort of service people, they sent emails out, for example, that are called holiday schedule, and they were able to find out through LinkedIn and social engineering who the manager of a specific branch is. And they send out an email called holiday schedule 2 weeks before Christmas. Guess how many people clicked on it? Pretty much everyone, right? And then what it was a PowerShell Empire script that opened a back door. And people didn't even notice anything happening on their screen. So people said, oh, nothing happened, so let me click on it again, right? So they did it again. So, and once they had access to the network, they were able to download like gigabytes of, because there was no network segmentation, there was no internal sort of controls how to move within the organization, gigabytes of data. And then suddenly the CEO of the gaming establishment got an email asking for $500,000 of Bitcoin, which last year was way less in Bitcoins than it is now. And they should pay within 72 hours, otherwise they will release that information. So the CEO thought, oh, that's just spam. I just deleted and didn't act on it. So it took another 24 hours before they reached somebody within the organization before they took action and decided that this is a serious threat. So if this would happen to you, would you pay the ransom? Like they put stuff on Pastebin, they had proof. They had network diagrams, they had HR files, they had files from their gaming arm. So they had proof that they were in the organization. So how many people would pay? I guess it depends, right? So you should also have in your organization, in your incident response plan, you should have some sort of a risk matrix that if there's public data leaked or PII data or customer data leaked, where you go through to determine if you pay the ransom or not. It's not as black and white anymore nowadays to say, no, we're not paying it. If the impact on your brand is so big, you might want to pay. I think in the Uber case, Uber got hacked, and they said originally that it was sort of, they paid a white hacker they paid him off because it was a bug bounty program, but what it actually was, it was that they paid somebody off not to release data that they had. So the skill set is very low to moderate. They're using tools that are available on the internet, but they're successful with it. And we followed them over a couple of years, and originally they didn't ask organizations for any money. They just said, hey, we breached you, there's some information you might want to do about it. But more and more they noticed that they can't be caught because they're operating from somewhere in the world where Canadian law enforcement does not have any access to. So they got more and more bold, and by the last time we saw it was like $500,000, which they didn't get paid. But there's probably others who didn't come to Mandiant and where we didn't have the attribution, they might have paid. So we don't know. We don't know because we don't have breach notification legislation here in Canada yet. It's coming this year. So there's also intelligence-motivated threat actors that we have to deal with. China is just one example, but there's also the Russians, North Koreans that are heavily involved in stealing what potentially could be interesting to them, right? And they, compared to the threat actor that I just talked about, Finton, are very sophisticated. So to detect these organizations, if you're a target of them, will often be very difficult because they use a lot of customized sort of malware, very targeted attacks against the organization. Oftentimes we see these threat actors when a Canadian law enforcement agency calls either them or us to sort of work with them to see if we can either attribute them to one of the nation states or if they already have been in there and we get called in to help them out with our intelligence that we have from other attacks that we have seen. So they're out there, it can happen to anyone, and oftentimes you won't even know that you have them, right? So I said that custom tools, they even have they have a workforce. Like we have a workforce in our jobs, they have a workforce working on attacking if they have an organization in mind, they deploy these people, they have, they use special algorithms to do command and control traffic that you might not necessarily see or to detect right away because your detection mechanisms are not there. So here is where we believe we have to improve our security stance when it comes to protecting ourselves from being breached. We are very good on this side of the attack lifecycle, right? But where we are falling down as an industry is on the inside, like the lateral movement. Once an organization inside, like Lance was saying, like even with an organization like Yahoo, they did not know that the attackers were moving around within the environment. There's a lot more that we need to do from a detection and monitoring perspective and from utilizing indicators of compromise, IOCs, that we have from other attacks to know that something's going on within our networks. We still leave a lot of pieces of our network unprotected by not segmenting. We have computers that are still legacy in our environments. We have computers that allow local admin in our environments, and all that can be exploited and used by these attackers to their advantage. So here are the trends. This is from last year. These are the industries that we have seen being attacked. Now, this is only what Mandiant worked on. This is only what we worked on and not any other information. Here it is, the number, 99 days. So we found in our assessments, when we get called in for incident response, the attackers were, on average, 99 days in the environment before the customer noticed, before they even did something about it. It's 47 days than the year before, so we definitely see an improvement. There's another slide that shows it since we started tracking it. But when we do a red team utilizing the tools and techniques that the attackers use, it takes us usually 2 to 3 days to gain AD credentials in the organization. So that means there's still 93 days too long where we feel that attackers are in the organization. How much data can be stolen in 99 days? A lot. All right, so another interesting thing that we look at, this is just from a global perspective. Globally, it's 99 days, but you can see in North America, we're a little bit more mature when it comes to incident response and detection. Other parts of the world are a little bit lacking behind, so they're skewing the numbers a little bit. And another number, here's the graph that I talked about in 2011 was over a year. When we looked at it, but it's going down. So we're definitely on the right track. I'm very curious to see how the Equifax breach will skew the numbers with this year's report, if it goes up.
Can
Yes?
you differentiate between the breaches where people were informed by meaning discovery?
Yes, it's the next slide. I want to get to that right here.
Thanks.
So for the first year, it has tipped that the internal notification was 53% rather than external. Before this year, it was external notification was higher. You never want to be on the receiving end of a phone call from CSIS or whoever RCMP that says, hey, we just found some data from you out there, right? You want to be the company. You want to be finding out yourself. If I can give you that piece of advice. I know sometimes it's not possible. Yes?
That's actually pretty shocking because I think the paradigm of people reporting is actually much greater in them being discovered instead of meaning they're being informed.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming, it's kind of a basic question, but I'm assuming people engage you very differently when they internally discover it versus, they read about it on Pastebin or Twitter, So that.
Yeah, when they read it on Pastebin or Twitter, usually the fire engines, everything's going, right? And much, much quicker. When they have not been discovered, you can also take a more, I don't want to say by the book approach because every incident is different, right? You should have an incident response plan, but everybody knows in the event of an incident, even your incident response plan is not exactly how you're going to respond to the incident because every incident is different. But whereas if you're already in the sort of news in the media, then a lot of people that should not be involved in the incident response, and I'm talking upper level management, it's better if they're not involved right away. If you can sort of do your thing and scope the incident properly and then come to them. What was one of the biggest issues, the lessons learned from some of those breaches that we had last year? Home Depot, no, not Home Depot, Target, I was thinking, for example, in the problem was they didn't properly inform the public what has happened, right? So you have CEOs or CIOs jumping the gun, wanting to go in front of the press, trying to calm things down and say, oh yeah, we had X thousand of records breached, everything's under control, everybody can sleep, we'll take care of it. And then in the investigation you find out, whoa, it's actually 10 times more records that were breached, right? And then you have to retract what you said, you have to go in front of the media, and you don't look trustworthy, right? You don't want to do that. So the more you can control an incident response, the more you can control the communication, the better it is from a public view perspective, especially on the brand. And companies like Mandiant can help with that, right? Oftentimes when you're dealing with an incident in your own organization, you have people looking over your shoulder telling you to do this, telling you to do that. But if you bring a third party in that has worked on the largest breaches in the world, they know how to take a step back and how to take a breather and do the right things at the right time, right? Does anyone have a retainer with an incident response company? By retainer, I mean, do you know who to call in case you get this call from CSIS or your SIM tells you, oh my God, we just had 5 gigs of data go out? So who do you work for, Charles?
Vancouver Foundation, and it's detective that we work with.
And you knew who to call?
Yes, yeah.
Excellent. Like there's retainers out there, they're so-called $0 retainers. They don't cost you any money, but they at least give you 2 things. You set up the terms and conditions with an organization, so when there's an incident, you do not want to have your lawyers and the lawyers from the company that you're working with talk about for days to come up with a statement of work to do your incident response. When you get breached, you want to work on the incident response. And it also gives you a phone number to call and certain SLAs for those people to help you with. So if you don't have that, please work with whoever vendor you're working with to get at least sort of a tier 1, we call it tier 1, $0 incident response retainer in place. So the information that I just showed is from 2016 because we haven't released our M-Trends report, what we call M-Trends. We have some copies of our M-Trends report at our booth if you want to grab one, or you can download it for free on the net too. But here are some observations that we have made last year that we can already talk about that have been going on. So, and it's all very much from a nation-state perspective. Last year, the nation-states really have picked up when it comes to attacking and trying to achieve certain goals. And what did I say about those earlier? They have all the time, money, and resources in the world against your organization that does not have that. But then you think, what do I have that they could possibly want? You never know. Everyone is a target. Questions? So what do we see going forward? We will see more destructive attacks. So what we have seen is credit cards are no longer don't have a lot of value anymore, for example, on the internet. Even PII for stealing PII for identity theft is not as valuable anymore, right? Because there's so much out there. What is valuable is the information that you have of an organization is the value to that organization. So we will see a lot more destructive or extortion attacks. So when I was talking about Finton, not only did they take gigabytes of data and put it on Pastebin, but they also put logic bombs and backdoors in the environment that said, if you are not paying us within those 72 hours, we will destruct your network, right, and your data. So imagine everything is down and you can't get to it. So we, from an incident response perspective, have to come in and also close those backdoors, find those logic bombs, which with IOCs and attribution is much easier for an incident response company than your organization. So we will see a lot more destructive attacks, extortion attacks. Attribution is very, very important. I mentioned it, like the more intelligence you can have about a threat actor, the easier it is to combat that threat actor. If there's a global conflict, you will see cyber will be part of it. Cloud infrastructure, we are all moving into the cloud, so are the attackers. So they will be using cloud infrastructure to attack whatever assets we have in the cloud and to gain access to data that is in the cloud. It will be a national focus. A lot of money is being invested by the government, by our government, into cyber, by other governments. They will become more and more sophisticated, we know that. Government will become more involved, and intelligence sharing. Like if you're in the mining industry, for example, which was part of the Finton, they have started an intelligence sharing group, an iSight, right, where they sit together, or not sit together, but if they see that an organization is under attack and they find an IOC, an indicator of compromise, they will share it with their other peers, because it's very likely that if one company in one sector is being attacked, that the other companies in the same sector will be a target as well. So sharing information, if you don't have those relationships, usually that's free to do that, I would really encourage you to do so. What have we learned? If your network can be compromised, it will be compromised. It was very interesting. What was different with the Equifax breach than any other breach that we have?
It was preventable.
Well, I think everything's preventable. But what have we said for the longest time, for the last 2 years, is the number one threat, the number one way. Pardon me?
It was an email.
It was email.
It wasn't.
It wasn't email. That's right. That's the right answer. So Equifax, it wasn't email. And why was it not email? Because we had more and more the zero-day vulnerabilities from the shadow brokers coming out, right? So we have to we did a very good job in the industry protecting our core, our outside defenses, right? But now with these sort of 0 days that nobody knew before, we have to pay close attention to that as well again, right? So, but if there is a way in, if it's through email or a vulnerability network, they will get in. There exist few risks and repercussions for the attackers. That has been the case, but I think last year we've seen a couple where that has changed. Yahoo was one. We found one Yahoo guy out of Canada, actually. I'm not sure if he's extradited yet or not, but we identified people. By we, I mean actually Mandiant. And there was another insider case here in Canada where we were able, because the VPN, he used the Tor network, it dropped for a millisecond back to his own ISP, which was a Rogers ISP. We were able to get a warrant with the police, and he had all the information still there. So it was an insider job, but our techniques are getting better. By our, I mean the Royal, I don't mean Mandiant, I mean the cybersecurity people who are doing the right things. We're getting better too. So we will catch more of the bad guys, especially if they are in countries where we can work with other law enforcement together to catch them. I already talked about that, so the Tradecraft is getting better and better. They're pooling resources together. Attribution and threat intelligence are becoming more and more. And you can buy or you can get even open source threat intelligence, right? Obviously, if you buy it, you get it from companies who are firsthand involved with it. The open source might be outdated, but if you can get intelligence, if you can be part of a iSight network to get information about other attacks sooner before it hits you, you're one step ahead. Disclosure is more probable, and it's probably not you who will disclose it, right? So especially with Canada now, the breach notification coming, you will have to notify the authorities. So again, we shouldn't focus, and I think we already see that change. We shouldn't focus on eliminating the breach because it's impossible. But how do we deal with it? Here are some mitigation and response strategies to those, to that threat life cycle that I talked about, right? So if we're talking about a commodity threat, you won't have to deal with here. A commodity threat will only sort of put a backdoor on your environment. So what can you do and what sort of techniques are there? And we all know these techniques, right? So user awareness is a big one, like to prevent it, right? So especially from an initial compromise. Network IDS. So some of these legacy or tried and true technologies are still valid, helping us in our approach to cybersecurity, right? But here are some of the things that even from a commodity, from a ransomware perspective, if you can minimize access to file shares so that not suddenly your malware or ransomware will have access to the entire file shares and you have to restore it from backup if you have a backup. If it only catches a couple of files or file servers, then it's less work for you to do so, right? For completing the mission, like if you're dealing with PII, if you're worried about your HR data, it's always good to already talk about credit protection with organization in the event you need it. Now from a target threat lifecycle perspective, as I mentioned here, we want to pay close attention of what's going on in here, this life cycle about being on the internal network. What are they doing when they move around laterally within the organization? What can we do? How can we detect them? How do we prevent them from going from A to B and getting access to all those file servers and file shares that we have, getting access to our AD server? That's what we want to pay attention to. And here are some of the tips, and as I said, we make this available to you. And if you don't use some of those already, then you're welcome to use those within the organization. But these are all what we normally do in cybersecurity. What's more important, and I have 5 minutes left, is what do you do in the event that you're actually breached, right? Crisis management. Do you know who is dealing with the crisis? And who should be part of a crisis management team? Do you have a retainer with a lawyer in place that can act as a breach coach? Right? Why do you need a breach coach? Do we need a breach coach? So who should be part of that? So really making sure that if you're breached, if you know that you pull out that plan, that IR plan, and know who you can deal with. Escalation coordination, right? You should have an escalation matrix. You should have defined SLAs, not only internally within the organization, but also with your outside vendors, right? With an incident responders. If you're breached, will they come on site on a best case scenario, and it's like, as I said, on a $0 retainer? Or will you buy a higher retainer where they will be there within 4 hours on site and help you to mitigate and scope the incident, right? Will you call police if you're breached and law enforcement? Some organizations are very hesitant involving law enforcement when they are breached. Any ideas why?
Control information flow.
Right. And the police always tells us we're the last ones who will share that an organization is breached, right? But it's that perception that's out there that the police will go and notify or tell the public that somebody has been breached, right? So having a contact within law enforcement that that is a trusted advisor, how to deal with the communication to law enforcement, is also important to have that beforehand. And how do you prepare your senior management, right? You want to instill trust into your senior management that if there is an incident, that you as an organization are doing the right things. Because if they feel that you're not doing the right things, they will be constantly looking over your shoulders and inhibiting your work and impacting your incident response. And you don't want that. You want to have a communication plan within the organization that says, for example, in the beginning, obviously, when a breach happens, you want to communicate much faster. Let's say we update our CEO every 60 minutes with the progress, rather than the CEO sitting on the terminal helping you and things like that. So you should have these communication plans established, and also test them with a tabletop exercise. Who has not yet performed a tabletop exercise when it comes to breach response? Everybody else has done a TTX? Excellent. So there's 2 tabletop exercises that you can do, right? One is a technical one, where you take your incident responders through a sort of a scenario. What would happen if Finton, for example, were to infiltrate the organization? Go through your incident response plan. It's a good way to identify gaps. But the other important piece also to a tabletop exercise is to have the executive tabletop exercise, so they know what to do in the case of a breach, right? So we can instill that trust into our executives that we are doing the right things from an incident response perspective. So run both. Don't not only run a technical TTX, run an executive TTX as well. Any questions? Yes?
When you were talking about dwell time, how do you calculate that if there's multiple threat actors involved? So if you discover a breach that's involving one threat actor who's been there for 90 days, but there's been someone there for 3 years, how do you calculate that?
We usually take the one that we were called for. Okay. And you're absolutely right. We have had this scenario not only one time, but several times. You see an APT group or a threat actor in an organization, you do your incident response, and you say, oh, there's Fin7 has been in your organization the last 3 years, right? So those are very interesting cases. But we usually take it I shouldn't say that. So in one case that I know, we had the incident response for the first threat actor, which will be one number, and then we started a second incident response for the second threat actor, which then will be a much longer time. Right. So fidget spinner and retainer. Please take that home with you. Yes?
Just curious to your thoughts on cyber insurance. Does that carry any weight still? I get a lot of that from my colleagues in finance.
I say yes. I'm not in insurance and I don't sell insurance, but cyber insurance, for example, pays if you have the right insurance for your incident response. So incident response usually is a very high rate, right? You pay a very high hourly rate because those are the firefighters who come in to help you. So if you have cyber insurance and you have the right policy, you have to talk this through, they will cover up to a certain amount your incident response costs. There is cyber insurance that pays ransom now. I guess I can't speak, but you should talk to your broker, but to a certain amount they would pay, even if you before said, no, we're not paying ransom, but now other insurance policies won't cover ransom. But so there's three things that there's a couple of things you should have. Incident response plan, tested with tabletop exercises, technical and executive. Have a breach coach, which is oftentimes a lawyer, have cyber insurance, and have a incident response company on retainer. That's sort of a couple of things that I would take with me. Yes?
What dictates your priority response to multiple events or multiple clients coming in and they all have, let's say, $0 retainers?
So $0 retainer in our case is best effort. And what happens, for example, the reason why we sell a tier 2 or tier 3 retainer is because they come with an SLA. Usually in our case, they come with 8 hours. Within 8 hours, somebody will have working on it, and within 24 hours, somebody can be on site. Just depends. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes, if there's a lot of outbreaks and a couple of our tier 2 retainer customers are pulling our resources in, we don't have resources available to help a tier 1 retainer client, right? So I have not yet had that in Canada, but it could happen. That's why we're selling an SLA.
A follow-up to that is, one of the products that I think Mandiant offers is a credit retainer. So you pay a retainer fee, but if it's not used, then it can go towards other products within that.
I think other companies do that too, but I can only speak for Mandiant. You're absolutely right. For example, our tier 2 retainer, and I'm not here to sell. I didn't come here to sell, but I have the question. So for example, the tier 2 retainer, you get a block of, I say 170 hours prepaid that we would use in case of an incident response first. But if you don't use it at the end of the year, you can use those hours for penetration tests, red teaming, security program assessment, whatever you want to use it for. Absolutely, you're correct, yes. Anything else? Thank you very much. I hope you took something with you other than the fidget spinner, and I hope I see you next time.